There is a PVE zone in the deep desert. Base raids are a thing. Let's talk about it. Funcom just had their final developer stream before launch, and they covered some really important things that you should probably know about Dune's endgame. The live stream was over 2 hours, and there was so much to cover. In this video, I'll be going over the top 10 things to know specifically about the deep desert. I'll be breaking down the whole 2 hours in another video, so make sure to subscribe for that one. For now, this is Dune's deep desert and everything you should know. There is, in fact, a PVE zone in the deep desert. It was briefly mentioned in the past, but still a big question for a lot of people. They made it very clear and even showcased that you will have a safe zone in the deep desert.
Of the deep desert.
It's the PVE area.
Correct, yeah.
So the PVE space.
It was important for us so that people that are scared of PvP or reluctant to get engaged with it, right, that they had a place in the deep desert that they could go to without, instantly getting killed as soon as you're coming through, like in warping in, right? Gate camping or whatever from other games.
It's not just a big deal for PvE players, but really anyone. Griefing sucks, and this will definitely help prevent that. Now, you might just be thinking, well, players can just sit right outside the PvE zone and camp it out there. But it is very large, and based on the guild size limit, they specifically mentioned that a guild would have to have each of their members spread out across the entire front, and they still probably wouldn't have enough to be able to cover the whole area. It's that big. They basically made it a really high effort thing for people to troll you. So they are very aware of griefing, and they have added this PvE zone to help mitigate that. The PVE zone also has another important purpose: base building. You can build a base in the PVE zone of the deep desert. They talked about how this was a good place to put your forward operating base.
And this is also where you set up your base of operations.
Yes.
The very first area, because the deep desert is gigantic. There's no water here.
Yes.
And you need to have the logistics set up.
It allows you to put up a temporary base that will make it easier to go back and forth into the deep desert, instead of having to load in directly to the deep desert and carry all your goods and loot back and forth. This way it's safer and quicker for you to secure or extract your items the way you would in an extraction shooter, for example. Get the loot, then get out, without standing at a loading spot waiting for someone to come gank you. They talked about how you can use the base storage system to pre-build your base in the Haga Basin, and then simply carry that blueprint and resources to the PVE zone of the deep desert and quickly craft a temporary base. Beyond the PVE zone, you can also build in the PvP zone of the deep desert. Obviously, building over sand is not wise, but there are rock formations that you can put bases in your attempts to hold down areas for the Landsrat quests. They have briefly mentioned base raids as well.
Yeah, in the PvE section of the deep desert, no.
Yeah.
But in the PvP section of the deep desert, there is a mechanism by which bases have a vulnerability window where they can be raided. It is a very short vulnerability window, and again, I would point to the lore of the Dune universe. So I'm sorry for everybody who hasn't read the books and doesn't know a way in which shields can go down for a brief period of time, but it is worth looking into because then you'll understand exactly how the mechanics can work.
So it will remain to be seen what it is specifically that they were talking about, but in short, yes, there will be some form of base raiding in the deep desert. This will not apply to the PvE zones in the Haga Basin. The Coriolis storms in the deep desert is a weekly storm that will completely reset the map. If you build in the deep desert, PvP or PvE area, that base will be gone in a week in real life. It is meant to make sure the bases stay temporary, and it will prevent massive buildup in the PvE area of the deep desert. No one wants to spend hours and hours building a giant base that will be wiped in a week or less. It does more than just wipe bases, though. It completely resets the map every single week.
Let's see that we're going to see 3 weeks of Coriolis Storm changes to the map. So this is week 1, and then we move to, and you can see that there's like 1 eco lab, a shipwreck, and a cave there, right? And a small base, and some spice blowers that have been marked. And then to the next week, the layout has changed. Where things are is different. There's a control point now in the bottom left. There's an eco lab in a different place and a shipwreck that's been uncovered.
And there will be different loot and different
loot in all of them. And then we go 1 more week again. And now you can see that this is a bit larger. There's another control point. It's a different house control point now.
They mentioned this will be during the lower play times, which is typically a Tuesday night, they said, and everything will reset. So come Wednesday morning, all the map will be different. You will have to rescan the whole area and rebuild if you built out there. And if it wasn't obvious, these storms will wipe you off the map as well. So make sure to get your loot from your forward operating base back to Haga Basin before that weekly storm. Otherwise, everything is gone. Another big question for PvEers has been around the loot. This one might not make you as happy, but there is some good news. They talk about the top tier loot in the game being found specifically in the PvP areas. Their goal was to make the absolute best stuff in the game, which they are currently referring to as tier 6, only accessible in the hardest areas. Makes sense. There will be stuff you can get in shipwrecks and different POIs against NPCs, but they will be in the wider PvP zone, so you will always have the risk of other players attacking you. But the good news about the way they are trying to do this is that the best loot isn't needed for all the content. They don't force you into PvP to get items that you need in order to do the main quest or PvE things. The best tier loot is specifically meant to accommodate the PvP player who wants to get the edge over the other PvP player. I know some people still won't be okay with that, but honestly, in a game that is trying to balance PvP and PvE, that seems like a pretty good concept to me. The world structure works like this. There will be hundreds of worlds at launch. Each world has one deep desert, which is massive. Then it will have multiple Haga Basin sietches, which are the PvE areas, and have a player cap of 40 per siege. It will also have the Harkonnen and Atreides trading posts as part of that one world, then the overworld map, where you can travel between in an interactive way. So it won't be all players in the entire game on one deep desert, which means, because it is so large, you probably won't constantly be running into other players. There will be ways to avoid people for sure. The Landsrad affects the entire world, so each deep desert basically has its own Landsrad. The deep desert is built with grouped servers, and there are 81 different sections, but they have made it in a seamless transitioning way so that you can fly freely over the entire deep desert of your world without loading. The loading will come into play when you're traveling between the deep desert and other areas. So if you're going back to your Haga Basin siege, if you're going to one of the trade posts, or in the future when they add DLC and other planets, you would use that overworld map to go to other worlds as well. There will be both PvE and PvP activities in the deep desert. For PvP, it will be about two things mainly, the spice and the Landsrad. The spice is obviously the most valuable thing and important for endgame crafting. The spice explosions are seen from across the whole map, so you will have people coming far and wide, probably every time you're trying to harvest spice. I imagine this will be the most common occurrence of PvP, people in their rocket-strapped combat vehicles waiting patiently for an enemy guild to try and steal their yield. Then obviously when it comes to getting other loot in the shipwrecks and close encounter areas, where there won't be any vehicles, you'll have PvP as well. These zones will have NPCs, so it will be more PvPvE in most of these. The Landsrad will have quests required by each house to hold down a point for a certain amount of time. You will have the opportunity to defend an area, fighting other guilds trying to claim it to get the rewards or win the Landsrad for yourselves. They showed an interesting example of how this could play out. The Landsrad can be won by getting 5 in a row. If you see here, the two factions are competing for this one last spot to win the weekly Landsrad. So this specific point in the desert is the only one both factions would actually want to try and hold. So it's not just who can get to one of these points first, but there is specific reason to go after specific points, and that could get pretty chaotic. Then the other one main scenario, which might not be as common, is base raids, which I mentioned previously, but seeing as how people won't be building all that much in the deep desert, it remains to be seen how common this one actually is. There are PvE activities in the deep desert. However, the whole greater area will be PvP. So it is also really PvPvE. But some things you might find yourself in the deep desert doing or going after are the toughest POIs. They mentioned that the NPCs in certain testing labs are meant to be taken on with about 4 people. So it will provide a very difficult challenge, but you'll still have to worry about enemy players. Although, because of how big the map is, like I mentioned, the chance of running into other people might be small. And I know people who strictly want to remain PvE won't be happy with those odds or that probability, even if it is really small. But there are plenty of things to do in the regular PvE area. The fact that there are even incorporated PvE activities in the PvP zone is a good testament to how much emphasis they are putting on making sure there's enough PvE content. Also, since the map is so large and it changes so often, exploration and cartography are something that can provide options for a PvE player in the deep desert. Another important resource, actually the most important resource, is found in bulk in the deep desert: spice. This we already knew, but a lot of fears were that it would be impossible for PvEers to get access. It will definitely be a lot harder for solo players and even PvEers wanting to avoid PvP at all costs to get their hands on spice, but there are options. First, let's talk about those before going into how you get it in the deep desert. So, you can buy it from in-game merchants, even though it's pretty expensive, but if you're a PvEer, you're probably going to have a lot of the things to sell by the time you need that. You can also get it from other players on the in-game exchange. It'll depend on how greedy guilds are, but at least it's built in, so you won't have to worry about getting scammed. And you can also just harvest it straight in the PVE zones. It is much less common, but between those other methods, it's likely you won't have too much of an issue if you don't want to go into the PvP zone. Now, for harvesting in the deep desert, you'll need a harvester and a way to carry it. You can use transporters to carry your vehicles, and not just a harvester either. They said that these transporters can carry any vehicle, but you'll see these giant spice explosions from a distance, and players will race towards it with their equipment and try to harvest. Obviously, this is a full PvP area, so you'll need to be on your guard at all times. Not going to be very ideal for the PvE player, but it might work for a solo player because it's not just you and other guilds. You have a sandworm to worry about at all times, and you can call that sandworm with a thumper. So between ornithopters, buggies with rocket launchers, players with rocket launchers, a thumper to call a sandworm at your will, and oh yeah, this giant sandworm to deal with, and I could see it getting completely chaotic, and I'm really looking forward to it. The deep desert will remain separate from the main story, so people who are PvEers and who really just want to experience the Dune universe, beautiful world of Arrakis, and experience the story of Dune Awakening, you won't be locked out of story content. You also won't be locked out of story content if you choose not to join a faction. There will be NPCs with a bit of interesting information perhaps, but as far as any story content or things that you need to progress you or your character, you will not be limited if you choose not to go into the deep desert. There are 3 main ways to lose your loot in the deep desert. The sandworm, you lose everything. The big sandworm, you also lose everything, if that wasn't obvious. The big one is the one that comes out when you are harvesting spice, and it's a lot bigger. It will eat everything and anything that doesn't get out of there fast enough. You will also lose everything from the Coriolis storm. That includes your base. So if that's not moved to Haga Basin by the time it comes every week, you'll lose everything you built and that you had stored in your base. And the third is death by an enemy player or an NPC, but only when the decree has been announced. Every week, the guild that has the most influence can vote on various decrees that affect the entire world. One of those is the right of salvage, where all your loot is dropped upon death, but only in the deep desert. So, if players vote on that decree, then that is a time you will want to avoid getting into the deep desert if you're afraid of losing all your stuff. When that decree is not called, you will still lose your resources and your armor will take damage, but you will not lose your armor or gear unless the decree is called. Alright, that's it for this one. I appreciate you watching. Like I mentioned, I'm going to be breaking down the entire live stream in another video, so make sure to subscribe if you want to see that one, and leave a comment, let me know what you thought, and if you're excited for Dune Awakening.